Good morning. Mayor Bolin is calling us to order. Good to see everyone. My name is Homer Erickson. I have the privilege of serving as the Dean of the Neely School of Business here at TCU, and it's good to have all of you here today. What a great morning. Fall is here. It's holiday season, so I'm going to advertise a couple of things real fast. Out on the table, you'll see a flyer, and probably there might be some on your tables even here, something called Majors Moments. This is the 75th anniversary of the Neely School is next year, and we have a variety of things we're doing leading up to that event. And one of the things we did, a local author and I put together a book of 80 stories of 80 alumni from the Neely School. They're kind of fun. Stories, anecdotes, they are stories of kind of how they got into their career, what they've done in their career, and some advice for students and for business leaders for career success. So what a great Christmas present if you've started to shop already for that. And some of the people in the room are in the book. I won't tell you who, but if you go pick up a flyer, you can see that as well. And then an even better Christmas present for you. We're going to have an alumni trip this May. It's going to be the Honors College and Neely School alumni and friends are going to go to Spain May 19th to the 25th. So what a wonderful thing to do, to come along and enjoy with friends. I can't think of a better thing for your friend or partner than to buy a trip to Spain to come along with Neely things. We're actually going to have not just a wonderful time in Sevilla and in Granada, but we're also I'll be doing a program one evening with a good friend who's a vice president and a professor in Spain, and then the dean of the Honors College is also going to be doing a presentation on a different night. She's a Spanish professor here as well, talking about kind of the cultural experience that we've experienced together. So again, look at those two things. We'd love to have you join us. I want to, before we go any farther, thank all the sponsors that are here. We really think hopefully this is an important event for you. We appreciate all of you that come and take part in these breakfast series. I learn a lot, and I hope you do too, just from listening to all these leaders that we were able to bring here. We couldn't do it without our sponsors. Our platinum sponsor is Frost Bank. Our gold sponsor is Fort Worth Business Press. Silver sponsors are Cockrell Innovation and Balcom Agency. And our bronze sponsors are Lindbeck and Acme Brick. Please join me in thanking them for their support. Well, let me introduce our guest. I think probably most of you have seen the flyer, but I want to just read what's here because this really sets the stage. What a great time to have Jim with us today. Jim Wilkinson joined Brunswick as managing partner in 2009, and he opened the office for Brunswick in Dallas Fort Worth in January 2011. He oversees international corporate and financial communications, transactions, financial management, strategy, crisis management, and litigation. Previously, Jim was Chief of Staff for U.S. Treasury Secretary Henry M, Paulson, serving as Senior Strategist Counselor and on Financial Policy and Crisis Management. He served as Senior Advisor to Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice, and in the White House as Deputy National Security Advisor for Communications. Prior to that, he was Director of Strategic Communications for General Tommy Franks at the U.S. Central Command and the White House as Deputy Director of Communications. He's taught international relations and communications at Johns Hopkins University, received his undergraduate degree in finance from University of Texas at Arlington, and his master's from Johns Hopkins University. We are thrilled to have Jim Wilkinson join us. Jim? I had the pleasure of meeting Jim about a year ago.
I feel like this is like that Seinfeld episode where Kramer's sitting there.
Exactly. But I got to meet Jim about a year ago and started learning about Brunswick, and a lot of us think about bowling when you think about Brunswick, and that's not the Brunswick. Tell us about Brunswick just a little bit. Who is Brunswick and what do you do?
Well, I don't know if this microphone is working.
Have you turned on the, so you've got to unmute it?
That's why you're deans.
There you go.
Brunswick, if I lose my voice, I've just landed from London, so we're based in London. We're a 25-year-old private firm that does very high-end crisis work for mergers and acquisitions, IPOs, a lot of litigation work, things like that. So we're sort of what's called a bone in the throat firm. When something goes really badly, you call us. So if I go somewhere, usually a lot's gone wrong. We represent, in the UK, about half of the FTSE We, here in the United States, have companies from as diverse as Bain Capital to Visa to Goldman Sachs to Facebook, you name it. And our DFW office is new here. It was great for me to come home. I called it DFW because calling it D would have just been wrong. And so we're glad to be here. We're over in Dallas and just enjoying it here.
Sounds great. What an interesting time. You've had an incredible career and just incredible places. And maybe we spend a little bit of time just learning about that. Why don't you tell us first about your time maybe with the Treasury and what was that like? I mean, obviously, what an incredible time to be there.
Well, I was working for Condi, and Hank called and said, I want you to be chief of staff. And I said, can you promise me a big job at Goldman Sachs when this is over? Because nothing's going to happen in '06. It's going to be a very quiet couple of years in the financial markets. And he said, absolutely. So that sounded good to me. But I'm reminded of a story Condi tells. A lot of people say, how did you get this and that? When Condi Rice was in the White House, people came and interviewed her and said, you know, you have such a great Christian heritage. And we've looked at your family. What a great Christian background you have. And your father was a minister and your grandfather. Tell us how this great Christian heritage and lineage happened. She goes, well, it's funny. She said, great-granddaddy Rice was a black man, lived in a town called Utah, Alabama. It's spelled E-U-T-A-W. And no one knows why, but he wanted to be a business leader and learn to read. So he went into the town and said, I want to learn to read. And they said, well, you're black. You can't go to school here. But there's a school called Stillman College just down the road, and if you went there, you could be a business leader. So he went down there and walked in and said, I want to be a business student. He said, great, here's how much it costs. He said, I don't have any money. He said, well, what do you got? He said, well, I got cotton. So he paid his first year of business school tuition in cotton. At the end of his first year, he came back in and said, I love this. I'm going to be a business leader, a great leader in the community. I want to sign up for year number 2. And they said, well, okay, here's how much it costs. He said, well, I don't have any money. They said, well, you can just pay in cotton again. And he said, well, but I don't have any cotton. They said, well, we know you want to be a business leader, but you have to leave. You go, why? You can't pay. He goes, well, those boys over there, why do they get to stay? He said, well, those boys have this interesting thing called a scholarship because they're studying to be Presbyterian ministers. If you want to be a minister, you could stay. He goes, I've been thinking a lot about Jesus lately. I think I'll stay and be a minister. And so that's a true story, and that's how it all started. The point is lest you think I planned all this, I worked for a man named Dick Armey for a long time, good man from this part of the world, and George Bush won and got hired and kept moving up and wound up working I saw a war, I saw 9/11, I saw probably the worst crisis we've seen in our life. Interesting times.
So when we think about Washington, D.C.
Don't.
How does a person operate, whether it's a Condi Rice or a Paulson? I mean, what an incredibly complex environment. I mean, what did you see as you're in the midst of all that?
You have to remember that town is set up to be inefficient on purpose. It is. We were founded as a nation by a people that had been under a very efficient form of government. It's like we were talking about India. The problem with corruption is it's efficient and it works. That's the problem with it. And when we came from under the king, we were used to a very efficient government. And when you're efficient, it doesn't always work so well for you if you're in the minority. And so with the legislative, executive, and judicial branches, it's set up to be inefficient on purpose. Our country is also set up to be, with folks like you, driving the jobs, creating the finance, creating the jobs and the new buildings and the new companies. It's not designed to happen in Washington. I think one of the worst things we did was have air conditioning because it meant Washington would stay there full time. It's a big problem. But what I would say is lest we all want to cut our wrists and jump off the bridge because we're so depressed, let's just remember it was set up to be inefficient and the best things happen out here. I was fired on January 20th at noon. It's like the death penalty, you know it's coming. And I had to leave because President Obama didn't want us to stay around. And so I moved to California, and I spent a lot of time in Silicon Valley. All of you should read the new Steve Jobs book, by the way. Phenomenal. Not a very nice man, but what an amazing story and management lesson. But it really gives you a texture of what it's like out there. And out there, they look at Washington with complete disdain because they're trying to create jobs and invent the newest application. And I tell the story when I was at Treasury, a friend of mine called and said he lived in a town called Menlo Park. He said, I'm working on this application thing where you could bank on your phone. And I said, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard in my life. No one's ever going to bank from their phone. He doesn't work anymore, so which would suck for me. But I missed that one. But that's really where the jobs are created.
Yeah. Okay. So as you think about the people you've worked with, I mean, what are amazing leaders for our country. If you saw leadership qualities, what kind of things did you see there? If you were to, I know they're very different persons, but
whether it's General Franks, Condi, Hank Paulson, the president, any of them, they're all honest. I think that's point one. The new Steve Jobs book, I think the most interesting part is he talks about the importance of computers. And his father taught him that when you built a cabinet or built a new machine, that the parts on the back that were facing the wall were just as important as the parts facing forward. And I think that's important because what happens on the inside matters. And all those folks I got to see privately, and they're all honest. I think it's the first thing. When you're honest, it's just amazing how little time you have to deal with gossip and things like that. I think the second is all of them had a view. I tell people in my firm, know the substance and have a view. Don't try to be all things to all people. The problem in Washington is most people are on three sides of a two-sided issue, and that's hard. All of them had courage. When you're sitting there after 9/11 watching someone like Condi, we all had to be upset. She had to go do something about it. That it's very different to sit on the sidelines and say, I would have thought, I would have done this. You have to do something about it. And I think prayer. I've not worked for a person that didn't spend part of their day praying. Condi Rice did it. I remember when we testified before the 9/11 Commission, and they were bringing her up to ask her if she somehow knew about 9/11 before it happened, and she kicked us all out of the office, got on her knees and prayed. I remember that. That's important. I've seen the president pray, Secretary Paulson, everybody. I think that's important. So I call it your Control-Alt-Delete time. At least once a day, we have to sort of hit Control-Alt-Delete and reset ourselves. And so.
Yeah, okay. Crisis. You've lived through some crises, obviously. And what were your advice? Because you were an advisor through the financial crisis, 9/11. So what kind of advice, how did you approach advising leaders? What do you think, how should we approach those situations?
It's funny because when Hank picked me as chief of staff, the New York Times wrote a story and they said he's unique because he shoots straight and tells the truth. Only in Washington does that make you unique, right? But I would say just a few lessons. One is have a view. All right, this is a day of social media. Penn State's learning that this morning. That nothing goes away. You can't cover it up. You can't hide. You can't angle. It's always gonna come out. When I go into a crisis situation, the first thing I say in a litigation perspective is, "Show me the worst email. Just show me the worst." And so it's always gonna come out. I think second, bad things just happen to good people. When I go into an investment fund and they've had an insider trading issue, or I'm dealing with an asset manager who's had a problem, or a company, I say, breathe into a brown paper bag. It's going to be okay. Bad things happen. And if you go to your investors and others and say, this bad thing has happened, here's how we're going to fix it, you find you tend to do better. Actually, you can get people winning to your side than if you try to angle it or cover it up. Emails. It's hard to imagine a problem that isn't related to email these days. Why people send the crazy stuff in email is beyond me. I don't get it. It's why I know JFK was killed by Lee Harvey Oswald alone, because the government can never pull off a conspiracy. There'd have been memos, there'd have been, all kinds of paper. Someone would have had to done something. And so those are just a few examples. But there's always a tension, and within a company, you've got to have someone that has the courage to say, this is just what happens in business. As I tell people, as Dick Armey used to say, the pain is inevitable, but the suffering's optional. It's going to happen.
What a time in our country for communication problems. You mentioned Penn State. Obviously, there's all kind of political communication issues now. You said a little bit about communication. Show me the worst email. But as you think about communications and corporate communications, what is that field really about? How do you approach? How does Brunswick approach it? How do you approach it? What's the framework? How do you begin to build an approach to corporate communications, if you will?
Most of our clients don't want to be in the press. Those of you in finance know it's never good to be in the press. You're usually a target, and not a lot good has happened. So the first thing I would say is that internal communications are more important than external. Having one spokesman, you have a great one here, Tracy Sowler-Jones, who's just phenomenal. We've done some work with your chancellor and others here. Having one person know the lines is completely uninteresting to me. Having an entire sales force know the lines is very important. We have an insider trading issue right now, and we've made sure that the entire company's employees know exactly what to say, because Christmas is coming. They're all going to be invited to parties, and they're going to have to talk about it. So the first thing is internal communications. That's the most important thing. Make sure your whole team knows what you do. When I go in, I'll go in sometimes, and I'll ask the general counsel, what happened? He'll say something different than the CEO. He'll say something different than the head of comms. The second thing is it's impossible to predict where the crisis is coming. All right? If you'd have told me they would fly planes into our buildings in New York and bring those down and attack our political military centers of government, I'd have said that was crazy. If you'd have told me Joe Paterno would be leaving or something like this, I'd have said that was crazy. So all of you in business, you can't ever predict what the crisis is going to be. What you can do is have a team that knows how to manage it when it happens. And the biggest problem in crises is most companies spend about 3 days figuring out who's going to speak for them. Then it's over. It's done. The wave has hit you. We represent a Gap, and they were opening a store in China, and the day before the store opened, a Chinese worker was killed. Well, any of you who've been to China know that culture. That doesn't bode well for who's going to shop at your store on opening day. And so by getting on there in the social media, we were able to get ahead of it. It's all going to come out. Just tell the truth. Just tell the truth. I challenge you. Name me an example where a company self-reported and it blew up in their face. Name me an example where a company went out and did the right thing and they had a bigger litigation risk. Yet the first thing I do when I go into is the lawyers will say, you can't say anything. You have to say no comment. And that's just as good as 60 Minutes. Remember the old video of the guy with his hand in front of the camera on the elevator going, I didn't do it. And so those are just a few lessons on the crisis side.
I know we're going to have a lot of questions here from the audience in a minute, but let me ask one other question. I look at your background. What an interesting background. What you studied, what you, both formally in education, your life experiences. If you talk to students, if you talk to children, what should they do? And if they're building, because you probably didn't start out thinking you're going to be where you are today.
I mean, I told a story at breakfast. After 9/11, I went out and did interviews. I was in the White House and went out and did interviews on TV, and I got kind of full of myself, as we were wont to do in Washington. My grandfather called me, and I said, Grandpa, I'm on TV. Isn't that cool? Isn't that great? And he said, you're an idiot. And I said, why? He said, I don't know what scares me more, Al-Qaeda or the fact that you're on TV for our nation talking about it. He said, but it's instructive because that generation of people worked the same place their whole life, including my family. And I'm 41, and we're really the first generation that has multiple jobs. And there's still a tension between those who want to be career architects and say, I go to the right school, and I lobby and network and do this, and I get this test and this exam, and I can get no. And so the first thing I tell young people is define success early. Success is just being honest and having a good life. That is success. You don't have to have the most money and those things. We tell people at Brunswick, if there's two things you should be doing, one is working hard to service the client, the other is out doing something fun and enjoyable. You got to live. And if you find these folks in their 20s, by the time they get to be 30, if all they've ever done is work, they blow themselves up and they wind up in the hospital or they're actually ineffective because they can't work with people. And what I tell them is the average 40-year-old is going to have 9 jobs now. And so just make sure in a setting where you're learning. Lauren Harris is here from our firm this morning, and Lauren acts for companies like Burberry and other things, and she started working on mergers and acquisitions, an area she said she's afraid of and doesn't like, but she's learning now, and so she's going to be very good at it. And so the day you stop learning, you're done. You're just done, and it's time to move on. So that's the most important thing I tell them. I also tell people, travel. I spend about half my time overseas. A lot of people come to me and go, oh my God, it's so horrible, I don't have a great job. I'm like, yeah, go somewhere and the worst you have to do is you pick out the red tie or the blue tie. There are places where people don't have food to eat. You go to India, you see the poverty. And so it reminds them, I think, how good they have it too. It also reminds us that there's a lot of other perspectives out there, and there are other people that are just as smart. One of the greatest threats right now to our economy is the last time we had the big recession, we were the only financial center that mattered. Now we got others. And so a lot of companies are refusing to come here now, my companies, and saying, it's too hard. It's too hard. We'll go to London. We'll go to Hong Kong. We'll go to Vietnam. And so it's important that they travel. And I think the final thing is have something that's yours. For me, it's running and those things, but have something that's yours that no one can take away that you can do. Those are a few things. But just tell the students, don't try to plan it all, because it doesn't work.
Yep. Purple tie is what you...
Exactly.
Questions from the audience. We want to open it, because I know there's a lot, given the background and things that Jim has done, and things are going on.
I lived off you guys for years. So.
Absolutely. So what kind of questions do you have? Bonnie?
You work for an international company, and you've obviously traveled internationally a lot. As our students look at getting those kinds of experiences in school, they'll look at studying abroad, and yet they don't really know how to place that experience when they talk to employers or whatever. Sometimes they say, you just traveling. What are some of the things that are quite engaging to an
So right behind you is one of my oldest friends, Andy Wamsgans, and Andy spent a lot of his life in Spain. And so Andy can work at a major league level because he knows how to handle a lot of moving parts internationally. And we are just a global world now. It was different. When I was in my 20s in Washington, you were either a domestic person or an international person. And the first thing I'd say is first off, it's just fun. You know, if you have the resources and means and can go live in another country for a few months, man, just do it. You know, I mean, you can solve a lot of problems drinking wine in France or Spain, man. You can, I mean, you can. And so, no, but those, I sat next on the plane flying overnight from London to a guy that does, they own one of these big services that takes students around the world, and they were talking about their crisis is, you know, they had a student die. And he said, what would you do? And I said, well, beats me. But so first thing is just you got to live. I think second, it's a bit like, I love pro football, and not the biggest fan of Romo, but I do like football. And if you look at great athletes like tight ends, all right, they're strong and fast. You know, the best quarterbacks are strong, fast, smart. You have to be 2 or 3 or 4 different things. You can't just be smart and not work with people, or you can't just work with people and not have any substance, or you can't be all. I've had people I interviewed that are so substantive, you know, but their nose runs and they can't get dressed themselves and tie their shoes, and it's just. And so you've got to be very diverse, and that just gives you a diversity. And I tell people your life is like, you know, not that I'm Yoda, but my view of this is, to me, it's like a mosaic. And as a young person in your 20s and 30s, you have to put as many tiles in that mosaic as you can. And that's the best lesson I learned from Condi Rice, is that just try to put as many tiles in you can, and then it will work out. But when we look at people at Brunswick, we don't care what school you went to. We look for the person like Julie Jensen, who was a world-class swimmer. Okay? You know, we look for you know, people that have some other thing in their background that was interesting there. I tell people, if you look at most CEOs and people like that, they rarely went to the right school and came for money. They always fought and worked hard and did that. So some of the lessons. But, you know, just go and enjoy it and have fun. I mean, there's enough trouble out there, and you know, you're not going to not get a job because, oh, I see you went to Paris for the summer, or I see you studied in China for a summer. My own view, when I was a child, we had to, in our school, learn Spanish. I had to take 2 years of it. And I was from a town called Tenaha, Texas. They required us to take 2 years of it. And nowadays, when I have children, I want them to learn Chinese, right? Chinese is interesting because you have to use 3 parts of your brain to speak it. And so it's an interesting thing. But those sorts of things in 15 years, when you think the world looks global now, wait till then, are going to be arbiters of the foundation, I think, of success. I don't know if that answers the question.
You know, building on that kind of international global question, you talked about how important it is to be honest and authentic as a leader, as a person. As you look at different countries, as you travel in different countries, are the cultures, are the people you work with within the different cultures more similar, more different, the leaders?
People are all the same. They want good for their families, and they want to feel respected. I know when I speak Arabic. I went to spend a lot of time in the Middle East, and you go there and, you know, dress like this and wear like this. You start with a little, you know, Ahlan wa sahlan, it's me, Jim Wilkinson, min Medina, Wilayat Tenaha, you know, Medina, Texas. They go, whoa, this guy. And so to them, the body language is, you know, he's learned a bit about my culture. And, you know, if you come to, we learned this when we came to DFW. We have a guy from London named Stuart who came here. He goes, oh my God, are they going to like lynch me because I'm British? You know, it's like, you know, no, they love your accent. You're different. You come in, and he showed respect, and now he's like the mayor of DFW now, okay? He's the guy. And so it's funny. He called me the other day and goes, I'm talking to this man. There's this big thing on it that says number 43. He claims to play for the Dallas Cowboys. I'm like, yeah, that's Gerald Sensabaugh. And tell him we need him to hit hard on Sunday. But it's Stuart puts himself in settings because he comes in as just very culturally nice and says, I don't know about Texas, teach me. And so people are all the same. I think doing business is different in China. The meeting is completely useless. Those of you who've done business, you'd sit here and I read my talking points, you read yours, and then it's the meeting on the way to the door. They'll pull you aside and say, here's what's going to happen. You know, in the Middle East, you're going to start the meeting at 3 in the morning. It's just life. It's going to happen. You know, in Europe, it's much more process-driven. What kind of tea are we going to have when? You know, and they take things that work in reality and try to prove they work in theory. I mean, there's that in Europe. And then it's always different where you are. But you have to know those cultural things. But in general, people want to be respected. People always tell me, oh, when you go to Russia, if you don't drink vodka, you know, they're going to take offense. Well, I'm sorry. I'm not drinking vodka at 7:30 in the morning. I'm just not doing it. and if I was with Condi once, and they tried to get us to do that. I said, look, I'm on the board of my church. I don't drink vodka at 7 in the morning. Sorry, they're fine with that. So,
Yep.
China's the only tough place because they serve Chinese food all the time. And we finally had a revolt on our last trip there. I went to McDonald's, and we actually drew lots for who had to go put their card in the ATM machine because you just know the Chinese have that now, right? And so, but I said it's a bit like having steak for breakfast, lunch, and dinner if you came here.
So barbecue's not big.
Yeah.
Yeah. Questions from the audience? Yep. There's a lot of experiences.
What would you have had Penn State do differently?
I tell my clients, look, I had 120,000 employees at the Treasury Department. Okay, I had 15 direct reports. I oversaw the Mint, I oversaw the Bureau of Engraving and Printing, Bureau of Public Debt, Financial Management Service that does all the Social Security checks. You can't manage all that, okay? So when someone came to me and said, we have a problem, there weren't any easy problems that came to me. And any one of us that are in business here, you get subpoenaed, things just happen. I mean, I was at Treasury, I still get subpoenaed to go to shareholder lawsuits about what were you thinking and all that. Life happens. Tell someone, okay? Tell someone, call someone. Even at little old Brunswick, when I have a problem in our firm, I call my head of HR and say, just want you to know, and I'm going to send you this email that says I'm doing everything consistent with the law. That's the first thing. Second, we were talking, in the old days is like the 90s, you could look the other way on things like this because there was no social media, and then you could get out. Now that's horrible that someone make a decision, but there was a good old boy network in a lot of places you could do that. And I think whether it was 1910 or 1998, that was outrageous what happened, and they should have gone to the police. And I think it was a horrible dereliction of duty at all levels. We've all seen good people get tarred with scandals they had nothing to do with, but I've watched the way your campus has handled. You had a sexual assault or so here. Y'all have done a great job with that because you said they're going to go under the jail. TCU doesn't stand for that, and so y'all have done a great job on those things here. I can't believe they didn't go to the police and say, "What would you do?" It's beyond me that didn't cross somebody's mind. And you have to understand, I work with companies all day, and we call it the 8 stages of grief. It takes them about a day to go through the 8 stages of grief. So I'll come in and they'll go, we've got this insider trading issue, and usually the CEO will go, what if we just didn't tell anybody? Whoa! Blow the whistle, kids out of the swimming pool. Lying is not a strategy. And so, what if we didn't tell anybody is not a strategy. And so, but we have to remember, there's a tension, guys. There's a tension, ladies and gentlemen. We've all grown up I've acted for Facebook, okay? I actually wore a suit to my first meeting with Facebook, and they were acting all weird, and they pulled me aside and said, please don't do that again. They think you're like from the SEC or something. Wear a ripped T-shirt or something. But it is generational. Most of us in this room remember when there was emails, none of that stuff. We had fax machines. I remember going to the travel agent to get your airline tickets. That was like a big deal, right? And so that generation of leadership, all of us, it's different now. And your first instinct is, well, why do I have to go put something on Twitter? Why do I have to Facebook about it? Why do I have to go tell shareholders? Do they have a right to know? Well, they're going to know. If they have a right to know is a different debate, but they're going to know. Funny thing on investors, we've done some interesting work. We found that when you go to investors and say, this bad thing happened, and we're coming to you to tell you, so you hear about it from us instead of the Wall Street Journal, they'll actually invest more money with you because they trust you more. And so it's an interesting thing. And that's what Penn State should have done. They're going to have to, you said it best at breakfast, they're going to have to do something bigger. Firing the old man isn't enough. I mean, this is about trust and faith. I'm so outraged by that whole thing. Just because I know what happened, I see it inside companies. So.
Occupies Wall Street. What do you see there? And do you think has any legs?
I think it's a bunch of rich kids who have nothing better to do. Is what I think. I think it's they don't even know what they all stand for, and I think that's a problem. I think that there's a big anger out there between the haves and have-nots. I think that, I guess this is my opinion, okay, I'm supposed to say I don't speak for Brunswick, or it's like that end of Monday Night Football, that thing they used to read at the end, but I just, fundamentally, our country has never been about a culture of envy. And, when I read the Steve Jobs book, he went from having no money and building computers in his garage to going public and in one day being worth $264 million. Is that right? I don't know, but it happens. And I want people like that creating jobs and doing those sorts of things. There are going to be people that make more money than other people, and that's just our form of economy. We were talking about India. The problem with corruption is it's very efficient. In other parts of the world, there are other places you can live and try a different economic model. We've kind of proven that planned economies don't work, I think. And as Dick Armey used to say, I don't think we want an economy that has the compassion of the IRS and the efficiency of the post office. But I think that they're tapping into anger. What I used to love in the White House is we'd see the same protesters in Seattle as we saw at the White House. It's the same people. It's a culture of people that go around, and this is sort of their version of international travel. I don't belittle them because I think they're out making a point. But when I see signs outside my office over by the Dallas Fed that say Osama bin Bernanke, I don't think that's a serious debate. But if you go to Ohio and you go to Michigan and you go to Kentucky and you go to some of these states, it's bad out there. It's really bad. I mean, we've got it pretty good in Texas because we have a business-friendly climate. It's pretty bad. I think they're tapping into that.
Can you talk for a second reflect about the debates, and not so much, for some reason it's really on our minds today, but if you were talking to...
I can't name 3 agencies, I would.
With that... If you were really going to be a communications advisor for politicians, whether it's at the presidential level or mayor level or school board, would you ever be willing to do that, first of all?
No.
But where does honesty come in? Where does strategy, what do you...
Look, people in general are honest and ethical, okay? They just are. There's bad people, but in general people are good, and positioning is where they get sideways. My friend Mike Moore's here, and Carrie works at the university, and Mike and I blow each other's phones up texting about... Mike's upset about the product that the Dallas Cowboys are putting on the field. He's really mad about the product. I agree with him, and as a season ticket holder, especially agree with him. And the point is that when people start looking at themselves as a product, then it becomes a problem. There are only 2 kinds of questions on the planet: quantifiable questions. How much does this table weigh? How many people go to school? It has an answer. Okay. The other kind is generalizable, and 99.99% of political questions are generalizable. Is abortion murder or not? I can show you data that says it is and data that says it isn't. Did welfare reform under Clinton work or not? I can show you data that said it did and data that said it didn't. Is Facebook good or not? Show you good and bad. And so most of the political questions have 2 sides. And the second you start saying, if you disagree with me, that means you hate old people, then you've got a problem. And I think our candidates are caught in this tension between trying to be all things to all people and being who they are. If you love it, believe in it, care about it, there's a runners for Kane or runners for Rick Perry. There's a Highlight athletes for Rick Perry. There's a people that made Breakfast Union of TCU group. I mean, there's Facebook groups everywhere. And so if your whole life is built fragmented, trying to please fragments, you never win. My daddy taught me that everybody wants to go to heaven, but nobody wants to die. And I think that they're not being core. If someone actually stood up, and I give Rick Perry some credit for standing up and really saying on Social Security what most of us believe, which it ain't going to be there for most of us here. I actually give him credit for doing that. But he was savaged for actually saying something that we all know to be, know to be true. But I grew up. The first political figure I really remember was Jimmy Carter, and I didn't like. I hated Carter and the Russians. I didn't know why, but I was just taught to hate both, and it's just what you did, right? And I remember Reagan, honestly at the time, couldn't have told you one thing as a child, but I remember he made me feel good, all right? And he brought some hope, and that's really what we need, is someone that can sort of lead us back, but we may not have it here.
Interesting. We used to separate, or think we could separate, business, politics, education. In fact, even in this venue, we often try to stay away from politics, it's about business. Well, you can't do that, I don't think, anymore.
That's the defining characteristic of this time, is the collision of finance, public policy, for the media. That is what we're living. They're going to write books about this and look back in 10 years and say, oh, now I get it. Because doing business, whether you like it or not, if you decide you're going to charge people for debit fees, like Bank of America did, and I love B of A, their client, it's a different world than it would have been 10 years ago. And so there's a collision of politics, finance, and all those things, and it's a new nucleus I think that's the biggest characteristic of this time.
And I wonder if I'm not sure how you do this, but I wonder if we're training or providing experiences for our C-suite level executives that prepare them to do that. It's obviously an open question, but that's got to be an incredible challenge. Whether you've grown up in business, particular company, or changed, whether you've been in and out of politics, I mean, it's just a complex environment.
I mean, look, we were all taught in business school two things: media, bad, evil; government, bad, evil. That's just what, I mean, if you're in finance in this room, going to Washington ain't something you want to do anyway. But it also, we've all been taught that, I love these. What if I just go and talk to the congressional committee and try to give them advice? Are you kidding me? And so I think first is just we've all been trained and taught. I remember when Hank Paulson was picked to be Treasury Secretary, he hired me. He said, "Now, Jim, you need to understand, I'm never going to talk to the media once while I'm Secretary of Treasury." I said, "Well, actually, you're talking to them on Tuesday. You are." But that was how he was trained at Goldman Sachs, was that you never talk to the media, stay out of Washington. All you can have, if you're a CEO and a leader, is the ability to adapt and change and trust people. I remember when we decided to do the TARP program. What a horrible marketing name, TARP. I was on the team that came up with it, so most of you wouldn't hire Brunswick, probably knowing that now. But we went to see the president. We were all tired, had been up all hours, and I was there with Hank and Bernanke, and we were briefing him, and Hank started in about the politics and said, "Mr. President, this is going to be horrible. $700 billion is not going to go down well." And Hank started in about the politics, and the president said, "Hank, you let me handle the politics. Do what's right for the country." And I remember he said, "If we don't do this, what happens?" And the president said, "Well," or Hank said, "You'll either have a depression or we can save the system." And the president goes, "So my choices are depression or no depression." Well, I choose no depression. Let's have no depression. But it is that simple as a leader. And if you're a CEO or a leader of a small business unit or large, you say, "You know what, guys? I really don't care what the lawyers say. We're going to go do the right thing." Condi Rice was told she couldn't testify before the 9/11 Commission because they said it violated executive privilege for a president, that his person who advises him. Now, you'll remember this. I'm sorry. I said to the president, I said to her, I think the national security advisor who's there when several thousand Americans are killed because they fly planes in our building, I don't care about executive privilege. She ought to testify. She ought to testify. And she went and told the president, "I'm going to do it. I have to do this because it's the right thing to do. Forget what we may think the interpretation of law is. I don't have to do it. I'm going to do it because it's the right thing to do." And when I go into a situation where and I'm just an advisor, an outside advisor, I come in and usually say what they already know anyway but don't want to do unless I tell them to, so I'm not that good. But usually the CEO, if they're very courageous and tough and do the right thing, they always win. If they waver at all, it always ends in tears every time. And it always ends in tears.
Any questions? Good. I want to make sure you have a chance to ask. Yes?
You talk about the fact that you want to be honest and be authentic. Go back to the Penn State situation. It's dicey. But the challenge is, like you said, when Rick Kerr went to talk about Social Security, he got murdered for it. You walk that fine line between telling the truth and having to deliver it in such a way that's palatable. So I'm sure that you're recommending that they tell the truth, but you have to say it in such a way that they're in the receiving mode for that. So how do you balance the back between wanting to tell the truth but say it in such a way that's palatable?
So the question's about truth and messaging, I think.
I mean, first off, you can't spin anymore because in the modern media, it just looks not authentic. So with investors, it's a different audience. With investors, for example, what they want to know is, okay, I have $50 million sitting at your asset management firm, and you've got this sexual harassment lawsuit. Is half the firm working on that, or are you watching my money? And so every entity in business, I tell them, what do you do and what do you want to be known for? What is your core? And let's just focus on that message. So I think it's knowing what you stand for. I think it's also you got to live with yourself. I tell CEOs, look, you're never going to be CEO again probably. This is it. And so if you want to be defined by this litigation crisis, at least get it out on your terms. At least get it out on your terms. Now, that's in a business setting. In politics, I think the problem in politics, I don't think there's a liberal bias in the media. I don't. I think there's a headline bias in the media. And I think we did a survey, and 9 out of 10 journalists will admit, so it's probably 10 out of 10, that they use social media as a first finder for stories. So bloggers are actually driving. Actually, when I'm doing something for business, a tech perspective, I don't really care about the Wall Street Journal. I leak it to bloggers. Leak's an ugly word, selective place with bloggers and others because it gets up through the chain. So if you're doing tech, you do TechCrunch. You know, the Wall Street Journal reporter can cover it 3 hours later, but you want TechCrunch. And so the other big thing I'll tell you is it's not enough to say it yourself. You have to have others say it for you now more than ever. And so you have to have others stand up and say, they're good, they're doing the right thing. That's the problem at Penn State, is they've got other people saying they didn't do the right thing fundamentally. I mean, this morning, the Dallas Morning News sports columnists are getting them. It's bad when you have the sports columnists, the political columnists, and the business columnists all trashing in the same paper. That's not a good morning. And so, but there will be advisors telling Rick Perry, I'm sure, that if you want to win, you have to not address Social Security. Okay? And that's probably right. If Bill Clinton was attacked for allowing 9/11 to happen, now it happened under our watch. If Bill Clinton had stood up and said in 98, guys, we're going to go invade Afghanistan, everybody in this room would have said, you're out of your mind. Afghanistan? But that's what people held him to at the time, was the standard. Well, he didn't go invade Afghanistan, so therefore the Taliban were able to be a group that actually allowed 9/11 to happen. So it's just the candidate has to decide what they stand for. Perry may lose this race, but he won't lose it now because of Social Security. There'll be other things he loses it, but he's not going to lose this over Social Security. But I'm a Navy officer in the reserves, and in psychological warfare, you're trained about resistance points. Just like if someone's cold and wet, they tend to give up. So the first thing they do when they're, as I'm sure our military person will tell you here, is you pump water in them, they'll give up. All right, if they're holed up in a cave or something, they come right out. And so you got to decide as a leader what your resistance points are. Okay, you have to decide what your resistance points are. John Krakauer, the adventure writer, wrote a book trashing me. He said I completely made up the whole Jessica Lynch thing, and if I'd only been able to get my hands on the Pat Tillman case, I would have been able to hype that too. Now, against every bit of advice I had, I flew to Colorado on my dime to meet with him because I wanted to tell this man how wrong he was, and he had lied about me. Everyone had said I didn't do it, but my resistance point was, at least I want to tell my children that book's not right. I'm going to go tell him myself. And so we all have our own resistance points, and only you know that, and that's what people will tell you. Romney's getting killed because he's seen like he's on three sides of a two-sided issue, and so. Sir? Never. Impossible. I want to, God willing, live here, and I got to find a good school district and do those sorts of things. And I've done my part. And it's great. When I was in Morocco, I met the King of Morocco once, and I asked him, "How do you get your head around the fact that this is for life?" That's all he's ever going to do. He doesn't get to go teach at TCU on the side. He's going to be king. And I just don't want to. I'd worked in government. I want to go into other things in my life, and I think that be very wary of people that want to make that a career, because you're only paid for two things in life. Either you're paid for who you know, or you're paid for what you know. And I spent my whole career in a world. Everyone said, "Why did you move to California?" When it was over, well, because I like Tahoe. But why did you move to California? Because I wanted to be in a world where they didn't care where I worked. All they cared about was that, and I had to go get roughed up and relearn business and get in a boot camp. I had not liked my friend Andy and others here. They worked their whole life in the private sector. I had worked in a world where, who you were seen having drinks with was important. And I had to go learn and try to learn, with my vast experience of 3 years now in the private sector, try to learn that. But be very wary of those kinds of people.
So what do you think about public service?
Well, you should all do it. Don't gripe to me about, this and that. You should all do it. Andy, who's here, was mayor of Southlake. I always, it's like, I think it's the Muppets or Sesame Street with those old guys that sit up top and just always make fun of everything. You know what I'm talking about? It's like, don't fly into Washington and gripe at me for an hour in a meeting that you're mad about a financial issue, and then go back and get involved. Get actually involved and do it, is what I tell people. I think I speak at young people. I think the best thing young people can do is go spend the summer at the FBI or the CIA when they're in college, and then go spend another summer maybe working on the Hill, maybe go spend another summer working in the private sector, but get themselves a diverse set of skills so they can learn what different things are are out there.
One of Race Monitor is one of our faculty members, but he shared a quote with from, is it Jim Cashman, is his name? That leadership is the authentic self-expression of value. And I thought, as I was listening to you, I think that I keep coming back to the value base that.
I mean, who do you buy things? I like the Allstate commercials. Have y'all seen those? I think they're great commercials. Right? I was at Farmers Insurance. I act for Farmers, and in walked the guy who was the father in Juno. That guy who does the commercials. What a neat guy. That was pretty cool. But he comes across as credible on the commercials, and you just have to. I tell CEOs this: you have to decide what you want to be known for. There's a reason Forbes has the most powerful list and the most rich billionaire list. They're two different sets of people if you look, right? And you want to be powerful? You want to be a thought leader? Do you want to be a good family man? You got to decide. And to the lady's question in the back, when you try to be 6 or 7 of those things, it tends to end in tears.
When I think about at TCU, I think it's always been true, but even never any more than today. When I think about a business student, clearly we try to provide experience for our students to be trained in accounting and finance and marketing and be firmly grounded there. But I think that liberal education, that the first 2 years, I think is so important for students to explore history and their value base and to really bring that together. And so I think as we celebrate at TCU the Neely School and the kind of things we're doing here, it's also about ADRAN and it's about science engineering. It's about that really understanding the world, whether it's scientific literacy or a value base. I think it's really an important piece. And
Steve Jobs' book, if you look at any, not that that's the new Magna Carta, but any big person that makes it has some part creativity and some part, business sense. And what Steve Jobs I thought was fascinating. Again, I'm not endorsing his lifestyle. Not a very nice man to his family from all accounts, but he basically sat at the nexus of science and creativity. That's a pretty cool nexus. And Condi Rice made us all read Russian literature. It's great because somebody always gets killed in the end, and it's good stuff. Y'all all read it. But she said there's no reason why a black woman should have ever wanted to learn Russian, but I did. That's what I wanted to do. And so she started as a Russian major and wound up doing other things. And so the liberal arts stuff teaches you, compassion and critical thinking and how to look at a problem. I've seen people in a deal setting, a merger acquisition setting, that can't get a deal closed because they're right in the terms and they're right in the finances, but they weren't right in understanding that the guy's son's in India, and ask about that, or how's your family, or those sorts of things. I think the liberal arts education is critical. Hank Paulson, you might know what he majored in, literature. And so,
yeah, absolutely. One last question. Anybody have a particular question we want to hear?
And then one final comment, we're hiring at Brunswick. So
we have lots of people.
We are looking for, it's a long drive to Dallas, I know, but we're looking for people. So if anyone wants to email me or call me, please, we're looking for top-notch talent, and we're in the throes of looking for that now. So,
Jim, I want to thank you, and clearly you've given a major part of your life, early life, in public service and supporting some very important work for us. And now you're here, and we hope you stay and continue to build a great Dallas-Fort Worth.
You're stuck with me.
So yeah, we appreciate it very much.
Sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You bet.
Thank you.
Thank you again all for coming, and we will see you next spring with our next event. Thank you very much.